Hello everyone and welcome to another edition of Trade Talk as we count down to a couple of fascinating preliminary finals. Just the second time in history and the first time since 2014 that two sides have gone out in straight sets in the same season, with Melbourne and Port Adelaide eliminated on the weekend. Very different matches, an incredible drama on Friday night with Carlton powering their way into a clash with Brisbane this week, and the Giants largely dominant as they continue their juggernaut. And they'll take on Collingwood in a Friday night preliminary final. They'll have strong memories of 2019 when they rolled the Pies as underdogs in a prelim. But we'll talk about all of that. It was some exciting footy. Tom Happell is alongside me. And Tom, what did you make of it? Obviously, Friday night was an absolute blockbuster in front of 96,000, and then the Giants looked very sharp.
Yeah, it certainly does. Great to be back with you for another week, analysing two games which were good to watch from, I suppose, different standpoints. One perspective, the Giants were free-flowing, attacking football, really easy on the eye, and what a win for them. Their Giant killing season, I suppose, continues, and the Blues, well, they underdogs and underdogs all night and came back from the dead. So two great games, and looking forward to getting stuck into the analysis.
And obviously the flip side of the coin for the two beaten sides is a tough read, and we'll have a chat about that. Todd Davey's with us from Stats Insider, and pretty bullish on the Giants in particular, and they couldn't have been more impressive. But Todd, what did you make of the weekend's action?
Yeah, you're exactly right on the Giants. So we picked that with Tommy as the edge of the week, and they got up for us. So lots of pats on the back all around when we come into the office. But when we look forward to this week, it looks like there's two clear-cut favourites on the market at the Betfair exchange, and the probabilities are suggesting the same. But you know what they say about preliminary finals, anything can happen, and the Giants have done it against the Pies before.
They have, and obviously looking to get into a second grand final. You feel if they get there, they'd be in slightly better shape. They're a bit banged up in 2019 with a few injuries, but obviously Collingwood does stand in the way of that. We'll kick it off with Rapid Fire, which we've been playing a bit over the last couple of weeks. And starting off with one of the beaten sides, I'll go around with both of you. But Tom, asking you first. Port Adelaide missed the 8 last year. They've made it to the second week of the finals this year. So, do we classify their season as successful or not?
Not for me, Daz. I think once a team does all the hard work to get themselves in a position to secure the double chance, I think you should probably win at least one final. So the Power were not in front on the scoreboard in any of their 8 quarters this whole final series. So I think that just highlights what a poor finish to the season it was for them. And as we've discussed on the show, Port's midfield is very good and will continue to be for years to come. But yeah, they're certainly lacking in all other departments basically around the ground, and they'll be ruining this missed opportunity in 2023 because it's hard to see them making the top 4 again next year, particularly with the emergence of teams like Carlton, Adelaide, the Bulldogs set to go again, and Sydney as well will all improve again. So they'll certainly be ruining the missed opportunity this year.
Gave up 56 scoring shots in the two finals, averaged 10 goals a game across those matches. Todd, do we classify Port as a successful season? We ran the poll on Twitter and it was 68% said no, 32% said yes. Where do you sit on it?
Yeah, I think I agree with the majority there. It's a disappointing season all around after a really spectacular midsection. But I want to throw it back to you guys about the off-season with Port Adelaide before we move on. Are they making the right call going after guys like Brendan Zirk-Thatcher and Asava Radaglia? Given that Joe Danaher kicked 5 goals in the qualifying final and Jesse Hogan had 8 scoring shots.
Yeah, I mean, Radaglia, Geelong are digging their heels in a little bit on that, as you would imagine, but feels like, I mean, they had a few injuries in the finals, and you know Jonas was a bit in and out of form over the course of the year. Tom, where do you sort of sit on it? I mean, it's one area I think they need to address. Whether those guys answer those questions or not,
I think certainly they need to address the key defensive pillar post, I suppose. But I think they would have preferred to get Ben Mackay. I think he would be a more preferable target to Asava Radaglia and Zirk-Thatcher. I think he's just a better player, and Port, from all reports, were targeting him, but were set to miss out on him. So certainly need depth, more depth in that department. But to your point, Todd, I think those two names are not the answer.
Basically confirmed that Ben Mackay's a 2-horse race now, Essendon or Hawthorn in the mix for him. Similar question, Tom, if Collingwood were to be beaten this week, would we classify their season as successful?
I'm going to say yes with this one, Daz. I think they've been the best side all year, finishing a game clear on top of the ladder, and they had the league's best percentage too. So I think from that standpoint, they were far and away the best team. And there've not been many better seasons from a second-year player than Nick Dacos, as we all know, who will figure prominently on Monday night's Brownlow medal count, and he's obviously a leading chance there. So that coupled with the fact that none of their veterans, speak of Pendlebury, Jamie Elliott, Steele Sidebottom, none of them have shown any signs of dropping off in form. There are many positives to take from the year, regardless of the result on Friday night. And I think, they probably just need one more key forward to complement Brodie Myercheck, and they can consider this year a success. But also going forward, they'll continue to be a force.
Todd, do you concur? Collingwood back-to-back top 4 finishes, prelims obviously very hard to win. Do they have to win it, or is it a success regardless?
I think if you win the minor premiership, you set your sights on a grand final appearance. But if you ask Collingwood fans before the start of the season, minor premiership and a preliminary final, they'd take that as a win. But overall, even if they don't make the grand final, I think Collingwood fans would still consider it a pretty good season.
Yeah, their future looks bright. A couple of, this or that options looking at next year for these sides. So I'll get both of your thoughts. Tom, more likely to play finals next year, Geelong or Essendon?
It's a tough option, Daz. I think, given one team, the Cats, clearly for mine, don't fit the right age profile anymore to be contending. They're far too old. But they're it's sort of hard to account for the winning DNA of a club, and Geelong certainly have that in them, whereas the Bombers are at the right end of the age profile and stage to probably be contending for finals. But as we know, they have a history of becoming non-winners when it really counts. And so it's hard to sort of split them, but I'll probably side with the Bombers, purely because I think of their young talent and that players in the mid-age bracket, I think are better than Geelong's. So I'll go with the Dons.
Todd, Geelong or Essendon?
It's hard to disagree with Tom there. Their ageing list profile at Geelong makes them hard to back in unless they have a pretty strong off-season. A lot of the Essendon's 2024 season is going to hinge if they can get Ben Mackay. Brandon Zerk-Thatcher gave up bulk goals as the key defensive pillar, but if Essendon can add Mackay, Gresham, and another strong off-season under Brad Scott, the sky's the limit, but they need to replicate it when it matters, exactly what Tom said.
All right, next one, Fremantle or the Gold Coast, Tom?
The Dockers, for me, Daz. I think they can bounce back next year. They've got a solid midfield group, a young core, and a really steely defence as well. And it's easy to forget that they've also got finals experience recently, having made it in 2022 and won a final there. So Gold Coast, as we know, never got near finals in the history of their club. It's fair to say that GWS are making a bit of a mockery of them at the moment in terms of the expansion club rivalry, I suppose. So until they show something, it's very hard to be confident in them. So I'll go with Freo.
Todd, Dockers or Suns?
I'm going the Suns. I think with a strong off-season in terms of Ben Mackay, Noah Anderson, Matt Rowell, all coming into their prime at the same time, injury-free going into the first round of the season would be really beneficial. Makes it a little bit tough with the first Dimmer Hardwick coming in as their first season as their new coach, but we know what he's done at Richmond, so I'm backing the Suns to make the jump ahead of the Fremantle.
And the third one, Adelaide or the Bulldogs, Tom?
Another tough one, another tough matchup, I suppose, Daz, but I'll go with the Crows. I think they played some outstanding footy this year, and they were unlucky not to have a winning record against all of the top 4 teams this season. So that coupled with the fact that they'll be motivated after Arkgate in round 23, I think they can really go well in 2024.
Todd, Adelaide or the Bulldogs?
I think the Bulldogs list is just too good not to be competitive again next season. They gave up some pretty poor games, but when you've got arguably the best player in the game in Bontempelli and that engine room that has the likes of McRae and Liberatore, you have to see them contending, or it's probably the end of the line for Luke Beveridge as the head coach.
Couple of back or lays, Tom. Back or lay, premiership medallions to be named after Ron Barassi.
I'm backing that call. It's a no-brainer for me. I think it's been mentioned over the last couple of days since since his passing, but probably the most influential figure the game has ever seen. And no one would be more befitting of this, I suppose. And I think it's something the AFL should really look to implement. And just listen to some of these numbers. So 2 times Carlton premiership winning coach, 2 times North Melbourne premiership winning coach, 6 times premiership player with Melbourne, and a Hall of Famer. So no one matches those numbers. So for me, that's a back.
A couple of the stats that stood out there too. So there's 6 premierships with Melbourne, which is about half of them. Included in Carlton's premierships is their most famous flag in 1970, which was a game changer, and North Melbourne's first 2 premierships in 75 and 77. Yep. And saw Daniel Cherney from The Age tweet that in the last 25 years, the most successful players or coaches in terms of grand final appearances have appeared in 6. So Buddy Franklin, Damien Hardwick, Chris Scott, to name a couple of those. In a 25-year period, Ron Barassi was involved in 17 grand finals, which is quite extraordinary. And the final one I'll ask both of you, Tom first. Stephen Coniglio, one of the stories of the year.
I think so, Daz. He's sort of symbolic of the Giants, to be honest, as a whole, and the improvement a lot of their players across the board have shown. Averaging a career high in disposals in his 12th season, and was BOG in their big semi-final win on the weekend. So his resurgence has been impressive, and certainly one of the form players in the comp at the moment.
Todd, where has Stephen Coniglio sat amongst the Stats Insider rankings over the course of the season, or even amongst your observations?
He's one of the great stories of the year for mine. I think making their mark really showed how under duress Stephen Coniglio was throughout that season. He got dropped as captain. It probably was the wrong decision to make Stephen Coniglio captain in hindsight, but the way he's bounced back after that and his knee injury is a testament to Stephen Coniglio, the person, and as a player, he was the player of that semi-final, and he comes in as GWS's 3rd ranked player at 44 overall. So he's had a great resurgence, and he'll be one of the key men to take on the Pies in the preliminary final.
It looks destined to move with the obviously the likes of Petrarca and Sinclair out, who are the 2 ahead of him. He'll be the leading possession getter in the competition, probably by the end of the preliminary final this week. Tom, your rapid fires?
So I'll kick off with, in your opinion, Daz, who's better placed to cause an upset this week, the Giants or the Blues?
The Giants, I think, based on their midfield run and gun at the moment. Well, I'm not discounting Carlton's momentum. I know you're going to raise the point a little bit later on, but maybe Carlton in their last 2 weeks have fatigued slightly late in the game. Against Sydney, they hung on. Against Melbourne, they looked like they were getting overrun, and they got a second wind over the last 5 or 6 minutes. But I just feel that the way Brisbane are playing at the Gabba, that's a very, very difficult task, not impossible. But the Giants' midfield is going to get a pretty good look at Collingwood. I think Collingwood will find a way through them, but the Giants are, for mine, the better chance of the 2.
I'll throw to you, Todd. So I suppose a 2-in-1 question here. The biggest improver next year and the biggest slider next year.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. It's a bit of an impromptu one. I didn't have much time to think about it, but biggest improver, I think it almost have to be North Melbourne. That list profile is really looking young, but they've got some great young talent, and it's when you've only won 9 games across 4 or 5 seasons, it's pretty easy to improve on that. So back in North Melbourne to make a bit of a jump with Clarko back at the helm, and to slide down. Even though they didn't make the finals, I think Geelong, as mentioned before, that list profile really aging. Unless they can add some really good talent across this off-season, I think they'll slide down even further.
Daz, should Simon Goodwin be under more pressure going into next season? Just given, I suppose, a comparison, Luke Beveridge is a premiership winning coach, as we know, at his current club too, and there just seems to, I suppose, be far more scrutiny on Luke Beveridge surrounding his job security than there does Simon Goodwin, who obviously Melbourne have exited 2 consecutive seasons in straight sets. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and obviously no one's ever done that before, gone out in straight sets in consecutive years. The profile of the 2 of them is similar. Luke Beveridge broke a 60-odd year flag drought, and became a hero. You'd think they'd almost build a statue. And then Simon Goodwin, 57-year drought, wins a premiership. I guess the argument would be Melbourne have stayed in the top four since then. They've been one of the better sides in the competition consistently since their flag. They've just fallen over in finals. The Bulldogs have probably fluctuated in form a little bit. They've missed the finals a couple of times. They've, out of nowhere, they'll drop 3 or 4 in a row and they'll pick up form. So they did make that grand final again in 21. But yeah, I would say so with Simon Goodwin. Not so much pressure now, but almost on notice, where next year they have to, I guess, fulfil that talent and expectation, if that's winning a flag or making a prelim or whatever it may be. But I would suggest that Simon Goodwin's on notice, and you'd probably throw Ken Hinkley into that mix as well with another finals campaign without a grand final for him.
Another one does. Should Collingwood expect much of Nick Dacos in the prelim, given his injury layoff?
I think he'll deliver. He strikes me as an incredibly professional athlete. He would have been working around the clock from the moment he got injured against Hawthorn, and I think it would be harsh publicly, or I guess externally, to expect a lot from him, but I think that's what you'll get. I think he'll be running his 15, 16K and getting 30 touches and being the Nick Dacos that we saw all through the year. I think he's one of those players that is the ultimate preparer and the ultimate professional. So I think he'll be fine.
And lastly, Todd, I'll throw to you, is Toby Green the best player left in this final series?
I think that's the case. He's a goal threat up forward, one of the best forwards left in the competition. He can win his own ball. He's very, very hard to beat in the air. It's going to be a great contest against Brandon Maynard on Friday night, but I think Toby Green is the match winner and by far the best player left in the competition. But what's your thoughts?
I'd agree with that. Yeah, everything's just touched on there. I think he's a pure match winner, isn't he? So the Giants, when they're humming, he's playing well. So he'll have to kick his sort of 3 or 4 for them to win this week, and I think he can do that. So
you look at the best player across the 4 clubs, so he would be the best player at the Giants. Patrick Cripps probably still holds that mantle at Carlton, or Charlie Curnow potentially. And then you throw in at Brisbane a Lachie Neale type player, or a Harris Andrews, and then at Collingwood you're looking at a Nick Dacos or someone of that ilk.
Darcy Moore
potentially, but I think Toby Green's the definitive one out of all of that for mine. Trade Talk Medal, our 3, 2 and 1. I'll knock over some of the honourable mentions. Stephen May almost single-handedly got Melbourne home on Friday night. Took, I think, 6 intercept marks in the last quarter. He held up as much as he could whilst they weren't converting at the other end, and ultimately they just fell short. Tom Green having an unbelievable finals campaign and an unbelievable season. Lachie Whitfield I thought was really good again for GWS in that game. Jacob Wiedering, champion data revealing he's the first player ever to take 3 or more intercept marks in 15 consecutive games, so he's been super. And Patrick Cripps, good against Sydney, better against Melbourne, I felt. So he was really influential for Carlton. But where did we land on the 3-2-1?
So 1 vote this week for Jesse Hogan. So another one of these GWS players that we've spoken about ad nauseum. They've improved out of sight in 2023, and he kicked 4-4 on the weekend. Missed some gettable opportunities. Could have easily kicked 6 or 7. Took 9 marks from 17 touches. And he was massive in their win. So he gets 1 vote. 2 votes, Stephen Coniglio, 2 goals, 30 touches, as we spoke about before. His resurgence has been incredible, and just some great hit-up kicks to leading targets in the forward line. Big forwards, they love nothing more than a midfielder who can lace them out, and Stephen Coniglio was doing that on Saturday night. 3 votes, Sam Walsh. 2 goals, 8 tackles, 34 touches. Best on ground in a famous Carlton win. So there's been a lot of talk about Walsh's, I suppose, leadership capacity since he was drafted, and he proved that on Friday night. He really stood up in a big win for the Blues. So that's the votes for this week.
So review and preview time from the finals just gone. So we've spoken a little bit about it in the run, Melbourne Carlton, with Melbourne butchering so many chances. They kicked 16 goals, 28 in the last 2 weeks. Could have won both of those finals. Ultimately, they've averaged 8 goals, 14 a game, and that's the reason they've fallen short. Blake Acres, the somewhat unlikely hero, he's kicked the last goal for Carlton in both of those finals, the sealer against Sydney and then the match winner against Melbourne. They win by 6 and 2 points, 11 wins from 12 matches, enormous self-belief. one of the loudest roars we've ever heard at the MCG. Tom, your summation of that one, where Carlton thoroughly deserved the victory, but Melbourne, to quote Dennis Committee, will be kicking themselves all off-season and probably miss.
Just touching on your last point there, Daz, according to Jared Waitley on SEN the other day, he spoke to MCG stewards who have been working there for 20, 25 plus years, and they said that is the loudest crowd noise that they've ever heard in their time working at the MCG. So the Blues faithful, they're a pretty special bunch, so good on them. But kicking 9-17 the D's, they should have been out of sight, I think it's fair to say, on the scoreboard, but shot themselves in the foot, as we said last week. Bad goal kicking is bad football. So in terms of the key stats, Melbourne won the contested ball by 16. They had more marks, more clearances, more inside 50s, and as we spoke about, 8 more scoring shots. So with that being said, however, Carlton's big two, Walsh and Cripps, it's probably fair to say outplayed Melbourne's big two in Oliver and Petrarca, and on the night that proved key. And Charlie Curnow, they'd be buoyed by the fact that he had minimal impact, probably their best player, and he was held to just 9 touches and a goal by Stephen May. So from that perspective, there's some improvement for the Blues heading into their prelim against the Lions. And they've just, I suppose, rolled the dice in that last minute, didn't they, with Wiedering, beautiful centering kick into the corridor, and Doherty running onto it. Then Akers basically on the goal line, cementing their spot. So it's been a great story, the Blues. Can they continue it this week? We'll touch on that, but it was gripping, wasn't it?
It absolutely was. And Todd, I'll get your summation first. So Carlton 11 wins from 12 games heading into that prelim. We'll touch on that in a moment. Port Adelaide GWS, so 23-point margin, but as convincing as you would see for a margin like that. At half-time, the Giants had 128 uncontested possessions to 66, which is an absolute belting. The lead was 29, but they'd kicked 6 straight points, the Giants, so they could have been 50 points up at half-time conceivably. Port Adelaide had a few chances early in the last quarter, but it felt like they got belted. The Giants have now won 12 of their last 15. How did you see that game?
Yeah, really interesting game. And as you mentioned, GWS just ran away with the game. It was pretty close at the first break with GWS leading by 3 points, but after that, they just blew them away. And some big questions for Port Adelaide in the off-season, as we mentioned. They look depleted down back, and they can't rely on Charlie Dixon up forward, so some question marks there. But GWS have just gone from strength to strength. They've still got some really good core from that 2019 grand final that we've mentioned last week, but this great young players coming through like Tom Green. He could end this campaign with the Gary Ayres medal for best player of the finals, and he just continues to knock up the ball. But Lachie Whitfield's resurgence after potentially being a trade target last off-season, he's gone to another level, and he's back to his number 1 draft pick ways.
And Tom, since the halfway point of the season, in terms of away wins, GWS have beaten Geelong at Kardinia Park, Adelaide in Adelaide, Port Adelaide in Adelaide, Carlton at Marvel, St Kilda at the MCG, the Bulldogs in Ballarat, and Melbourne in Alice Springs. So they've been superb on the road.
It's very impressive numbers there, Daz. They kicked 5 goals 7 to Port's 1 goal 5 in the second quarter and just blew the game apart. As you mentioned, that uncontested possession statistic plus 74, that is that's unheard of, and to go with that, they're also plus 19 in contested ball. So all round, in all facets, they were dominant. Obviously, the one slight query, I suppose, was in the last quarter. Did they take their foot off the pedal, or were they just a bit out of gas, because they allowed Port 10 scoring shots. Thankfully for them, they only kicked 1 goal 9, but I just wonder with the Pies this week and the Pies' ability to pile on goals in quick succession, that'll have to be a big focus for them on the track this week, not allowing runs of goals and allowing the MCG crowd to get up and about. So that certainly well done to the Giants, and the 250 was handy in the end, so it was good.
It was a big push last week, certainly, from both Tom and Todd at Stats Insider. We'll look to this weekend. So Friday night, repeat of the 2019 preliminary final. Collingwood belted the Giants earlier this year at the MCG, but GWS clearly a very different side to that team. Collingwood good win against Essendon in the last round and then beat Melbourne, holding them out in the first final, albeit conceding a lot of inside 50s in that game. Collingwood well rested. It's not always a great thing at this time of year. That's one match in 4 weeks, effectively going into the prelim. Giants riding the wave, but as you said, were they hitting the wall a little bit last week, or was it a case of putting the cue in the rack with an eye to the prelim? How are you seeing the match?
So GWS have won 5 of their last 7 matchups against the Pies, including that prelim final we just touched on at the MCG in 2019, which was also against the odds, which they will be again this week, so that'll hold no fears for them. So the Giants, I think, will look to expose Collingwood's defence with their smalls. So they rank 3rd in the comp for ground ball gets, and I think we might see them try to kick for territory a bit and look to get in behind that Pies defence and their aerial targets in the back line. They might just keep the ball on the ground for blokes like Brent Daniels, Toby Bedford, Toby Green to go to work there. They are ranked, the Giants rank statistically against the Pies very well in the midfield. So they rank top 5 for contested possessions in the league. Collingwood's strength, I suppose, lies in their scoring ability. So they rank 1st in goal assists, 3rd in average goals scored per game, and 1st in accuracy. So I suppose the stats say it's an even game, but I just feel with the Pies having the week off, the massive home ground at the MCG, I think they are primed this week to probably end the Giants' run, but you can never discount this Giants side, can you? So should be a cracker.
And Todd, Collingwood $1.62, GWS $2.56 on the exchange. How are Stats Insiders seeing this one?
So the Pies are 58% win probability, but Tom, let's get excited. $1.56 on the exchange, 3% edge. It almost mirrors last week, so I think we have to give the Giants the bet of the week tag again, and that 3% edge looks eerily similar to last week.
I'm going to have to, we'll touch on that in the trading strategies later, Todd. It's a hard game to call, but I think I might have to go against the Giants this week, which, they've been good to me, but they might come back to bite me this week.
We look at Brisbane and Carlton, Saturday twilight final at 5 o'clock. Ironically, either Brisbane will stop Michael Voss making a grand final, or Michael Voss will stop Brisbane making a grand final. A little quirk of history. Carlton's last win at the Gabba was 2013, 10 years ago. That was also the last time they played finals, so they might be in the mood to break a couple of those hoodoos. Brisbane almost unbeatable at the Gabba during the season, but they're 3-4 at the Gabba in finals since the start of 2019. So they have dropped a few, generally close games, but this year they've been particularly ruthless at home. $1.40 versus $3.40, Todd. How is the Stats Insider model seeing this?
Before we get into that, I think the Brisbane Lions would be pretty happy not to see Dustin Martin going up there, considering how much he's torn them apart. But the model has the Lions as the 69% winning probability there. They look very strong. We've liked them all year to make the grand final, and it looks like that's going to be the case if the model's correct. And the line currently is with the Blues at 18.5. We found a 4% edge on that. So maybe the Blues can keep it a little bit close, but we're expecting the Lions to win this one.
Tom, how you are separating this one?
I expect the Lions to win as well, but I think it's sort of a bit of a danger game in a way, because it's a free hit for the Blues, isn't it? They weren't expected to make it this far in the finals, and they'll see this as a sort of throw at the stumps, if you like. So, as you mentioned, the Lions have won 4 of their past 5 against the Blues, and they've kicked over 100 points in the last 3 matchups against the Blues. So that'll be a concern for Carlton's defence, and they'll have their hands full with Charlie Cameron, Joe Danaher and the like. So big job for Jacob Wiedering and the lads down there. Carlton's midfield is their weapon. So they rank 3rd in contested ball, 4th in total possessions. So if they can get on top in that area of the ground, that could give them a good chance. But I think Brisbane should be winning this game and marching on to the grand final. But stranger things have happened. So looking forward to this one, and can the Blues train roll on?
Yeah, absolutely. It'd be fascinating if you got both of the non-top four sides, Carlton and GWS, causing the boil-overs this week. We move into buy, hold and sell. My buy, we've mentioned him a couple of times, is Toby Green. He's been pretty good in the finals without being the Giants' best player in either final. Had 19 and kicked a goal in the first final against the Saints. Was in their best six, certainly, against Port, but didn't carve it up with the midfield on fire. And maybe Toby's got one, massive breakout finals performance in him where he kicks 4 and drags him into a grand final. So I think if the Giants win, Toby Green will be the reason why playing his best final of the 3. But Tom, who's your buy?
I'll just quickly touch on that, Daz. Toby Green, as you mentioned, it bodes well for the Giants, doesn't it? That they've been winning and he hasn't been at his brilliant best. So if he can, kick 4 or 5 this week, the Giants will be very hard to beat. My buy this week, Adam Sard. I think he's a really underrated player in the comp and crucial to the way that Carlton set up off the half-back line with his run and carry and kicking ability. He's had 36 total kicks for this final series and been very damaging, and no one's been able to lay a glove on him so far. So shout out to him. He'll likely get the job on Charlie Cameron this week in a bit more of a defensive role, and he'll really need to continue his good form if the Blues are to win, because Cameron has kicked 9 goals in the past 3 clashes versus Carlton. So a bit of a watch there, and Adam Sard might be asked to defend a bit more this week, and I suppose in a sense that's a hold as well as a buy. So. Yep.
I'll let you keep rolling with your sell. Who are you looking at?
Selling Cozzy Pickett's ill discipline. I think it's really costing the D's at the moment. And if you can cast your mind back to round 1, I think that bump on Bailey Smith was
the human cannonball.
Yeah, it was probably the worst looking incident from a pure visual standpoint this season. Us lucky to only get, I think he got 2 weeks or 1 week. That was not a good look. And then he followed that on the weekend against the Blues with another head-high bump. So I just think he needs to get those acts out of his game and the suspendable offences too, because he's too valuable of a player for the D's to be missing, and he's crucial to their setup. So they really need him to tidy up a bit, I think. Yeah,
and the ill discipline even in the first final from Van Rooyen, who got suspended, and then Pickett, with a couple of incidents in that second final as well. My sell goes to, I know Eddie Maguire's mentioned it a little bit as well, but the airlines and price gouging. So on one hand, you've got Virgin Australia, who are a sponsor of the AFL, bumping up prices and ripping off fans. They've been doing it for years with fans coming from interstate or going interstate from Victoria. And then you've got Qantas as well, whose chairman is Richard Goyder, who's also chairman of the AFL. So you're sitting there thinking, well, you work for the AFL, you work for Qantas, and your organisation is ripping off supporters of the other. We have an organisation called the ACCC who tend to disappear when things like this happen, but it's blatant price gouging, and I just don't know how. It strikes me as being something that is black and white illegal. But anyway, Todd, did you have a view on any of the buys or sells this week?
I want to get your thoughts, guys, on my sell, which is movie references. I don't think anyone will be making too many references after the Oppenheimer tragedy that befell Port Adelaide. I think Ollie Wines might keep his mouth shut for the next final series that Port Adelaide go into.
Yeah, best to keep that one in-house. I think we said it at the time, but I can't add too much more there, Daz.
Yeah, I think the bomb went off before they could deliver it anywhere, unfortunately, for Port Adelaide in that one, but. Yeah, there's I think a little bit more needs to be done for the supporter that's investing their money all year in the AFL to look after them a little bit more in that situation. But look at betting strategies. Mine just sort of simply centres around one thing on Betfair. You can adjust the line accordingly to how you sort of see fit. Obviously, it changes the markets a little bit. But if you think I think the Giants will be competitive, even if they don't win. I think Collingwood might just get them, but I think they'll just get them. So you could play around with whether you think the Giants will get within 15, 10, 3 goals, 8 points, whatever it may be. Choose your own line and play with that accordingly. How are you looking at it this week?
I've gone backing the grand final Quinella this week. Brisbane and Collingwood are currently paying $2.24 on the Betfair exchange, and I think that represents represents good value. Actually, I think I would have expected that to be closer to the even money mark. So I'm happy to play there, and they're the two favourites. So I suppose I'm not adding much from that perspective, but I think they're very hard to beat this week, both the favourites.
And I believe that comes out better than if you backed one and then backed the other, sort of doing the maths off the top of the head. So that's not a bad result. Todd, how do you feel about that in particular, a $2.24 price on a Brisbane Collingwood grand final?
Yeah, we've been really strong on that at Stats Insider. They're the two teams that will make it. 46.3% chance that they'll make it after the qualifying finals, and nothing has changed our mind since. But in terms of a bet for this one, 11% edge on the total being over 167 between the Pies and the Giants. So we're looking for a bit of a high-scoring affair to kick off the preliminary finals.
Yeah, certainly a big chance, I would think, with the run and midfield strength of both of those two sides. This has been another edition of Trade Talk. We'll have a special Brownlow live pre-count show next Monday, looking at all the permutations and getting the movements from Stats Insider on what to expect and how that'll all play out. And then we'll have an exciting grand final edition of Trade Talk as well, counting down towards the big one and wrapping up these prelims. So jump on the hub and check out all of that, and we look forward to throwing a few special things your way as part of the best week of the AFL season, which is grand final week, but stay tuned for that next week. Chances are you're about to lose. For free and confidential support, call the number on the screen or visit the website.